Our time with the GWM Tank 300 is almost over. It's been 3 months, it's been thousands of kilometers, and this car has had quite a hard life with us at the Drive office. We've been off-road, we've had the family in here, we've been camping out of it, we've been doing a whole lot of stuff with this car, and I'm really interested to see what it's like at the end of the tenure. And since we put out the first video about this long term, we've got a lot of questions from you, our readers, on socials, on YouTube, all sorts of places with questions about this car, and I want to answer as many of those as I can in this video. So let's see what we've found out about this GWM Tank 300 over the long term. Our test vehicle is the non-hybrid Ultra specification, which costs $50,990 drive away. There is a lower cost Lux spec which you can look at, which saves $4,000, or you can spend up on the more powerful hybrid powertrain. In our case, we've got a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine which makes 162 kilowatts and 380 newton meters, running through an 8-speed automatic transmission and low-range transfer case. There's also a part-time 4-wheel drive system and locking differentials front and rear. Against the manufacturer's claim of 9.5 litres per 100 Ks, we were using an average of around 12 to 13 litres per 100 in our time with the car. This number did go down a little bit when we were doing more highway driving, but heavier suburban use and off-road driving saw that number go back up pretty quickly. So it's not the most efficient thing out there, this Tank 300, but servicing costs are kept in check pretty well by a capped price servicing program. That is $1,150 for 3 years or $2,000 for 5 years. And even better is a 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty on this car, which also comes with 5 years worth of roadside assistance. After months of driving and thousands of kilometres, let's jump inside the Tank 300 and see what we have found and if our opinions have changed over the long term. All the other people that have been driving this car, I've been hitting them up for their opinion as well at the end of it, and a lot of people have come out of this thing and said, geez, the interior is really good, the build quality seems to be okay, and ergonomically the car is comfortable. These seats, they're a faux leather. You do have heating and venting in these seats. There aren't buttons here, so it's not completely obvious straight away. Those functions are buried in the infotainment. You figure out where they are eventually, so it's not too bad, but that's a really nice thing to have if you're spending a lot of time behind the wheel. So people got out of this car, they thought, you know, the big Jeep Wrangler looking 4-wheel drive, maybe it won't be so comfortable to drive, but it actually is. Ergonomically and ride comfort, the steering feel, that sort of thing, this isn't a bad place to spend time. Now, I'll spend more time on the driving impressions a bit later, but I think that's worth noting that it's not just me saying that this is a surprisingly decent thing to drive. There was a few others of us at the office saying the same thing. Another thing to talk about with this Tank, and I think it's a really important thing for new cars these days, is the infotainment. You get a lot of experience, and it can be positive or negative, I think, as you interact with the system here. And this, it's not too bad overall, I think. It's a 12.3 inch system, which is pretty big. That's the same as a lot of other cars out there these days, but I think for 50 grand in a vehicle of this size, it's definitely good value for money. The operating system, it's not too bad. You've got some buttons on the side here to get around for some functionality. Some things are quite buried though, so seat heating and ventilation, like I said before, also the ability to turn off some of those active driving safety systems, which can be quite frustrating. You need to sort of look around to find those a little bit, but on the flip side of that as well, you plug a cable in, you plug your phone in, and then you've got Apple CarPlay, you've got Android Auto. That's fairly faultless. I use Android Auto myself, I'm one of those people, and it's been quite stable. There's been no issues there. I have noticed that the call quality is fairly average. My wife's thought that I was stuck down the bottom of a well, I'm pretty sure, in one of the phone calls. I assured her that I wasn't. And also the speakers. The sound system in this car, they look pretty flash with these Mercedes-Benz styled speaker covers, but the sound quality, it's not amazing. It's decent, I think, but it does run out of puff when you really start to crank it up a little bit. That's maybe a smaller criticism, I think, overall, but the core quality, if you're spending a lot of time in this car, that could be a little bit more frustrating in the long run. Now, another thing I found out about this vehicle after a bit of time, there's a button up here which I actually missed for a fair while. It says 12 volt and it's got a little picture of a car. What is that thing? I'm not sure. I didn't actually have an owner's handbook in this vehicle, so I contacted GWM, and this actually connects up to a power outlet under the bonnet, which gives you the option of auxiliary power. It's not usable, it's not like a cigarette plug or anything like that, but it's there, it's all wired up and it's ready to go. It's just behind the air filter housing, so if you wanted to run something like camp lights or something like that, maybe, that is actually a handy thing to have there from the factory. The first time you jump into this tank, and I think this is the same for everyone, you're wowed by the vents and the ambient lighting and the big screens and that sort of thing. But after you spend a little bit of time, you dig a little bit deeper, and I found this car to be okay overall. I mean, the main thing for me was really about the build quality after a bit of time. Well, this started to rattle and squeak a lot after 3 months of forward driving, town driving, abuse from the family, all of that sort of thing. And it stood up really well in that regard. Some things aren't perfect. The sound quality could definitely be better. The core quality could absolutely be better, but otherwise, this has stood up pretty well. Here's the second row of the Tank 300. Last time in our first video, go back and watch it if you haven't, I put 3 baby seats in the back here because we're a family of 5 and we did use this as our family car for long periods of time there, and it did work quite well overall. But this time, the seats are out and I'm in. I am a little bit under 6 foot tall. I do sit maybe slightly close to the steering wheel in comparison to others, but as you can see here, I've got a good amount of legroom on offer. Foot room, toe room is really good. And we've got this big recess here as well. There's no air vents up top, but there's good space as well for headroom. So even bigger adults up front and in the back here, I think they will be comfortable. Now, otherwise, comfort is good. Seating materials, they're fine. It's the same as up front. You've got similar stitching on the doors. You've got a bit of ambient lighting going on. There's air vents, there's USB power outlets, there's map pockets. This is perfectly fine. And similar to up the front here, I haven't really reported on any major changes in the back here during our time with the car. We still don't have floor mats, so we've been vacuuming a lot in this thing to keep it clean, but the materials have stood up well. Build quality seems good. This is all well and good in the back here. If you want to fold the seats down in the second row of this Tank 300, don't just do it like this because it doesn't work very well. Firstly, you've got a little fabric pull there. Pull these ones forward and out of the way first. So now it folds down really flat, all the way from the back to the front. Actually, these seats are now kind of protecting their seats in front, but it just allows the fully flat load space. And we actually have found this really useful in our time with the car when we just need to use it to load a heap of stuff in. Now, one question I had about this car was, will I actually ever use that camping table that is hidden in the back here? If you don't remember, in the back here, that is a set of legs and they clip into this base and that becomes a fairly low little camping table. No, we didn't use it because A, there's always stuff in the back here, and B, the back will get a little bit more trashed, I think, and you've got to put all the stuff in the boot somewhere while you're using that camp table. So it's just not really practical. It's a cool party trick, but that's about where it ends. Now, we have used the 240 volt power outlet there. There is also a 12 volt plug, so you're well sorted for power in here. And there are some tie down points, 2 at the bottom. There's actually 2 up here as well, which I'm not sure what I would use them for. Maybe you could hang some stuff off it, I suppose, when you're camping, but yeah, I don't know what I would actually use those for. And there's a couple more up the front there as well. So the boot, it's not that big really overall. You've got to use the width and you've got to use the height because there isn't a whole lot of length on offer. But I think for the purposes of this car, don't forget the payload is relatively small in this vehicle. It's pretty good. Well, if you ever want to check if a car's been driving through mud recently, pop the bonnet and have a look, because as you can see here, we've been through some mud in this Tank 300 and this is going to take a little bit of cleaning actually to get this back up to snuff. But this is the 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine in the Tank 300, 162 kilowatts and 380 Newton meters, which by modern standards isn't very big in terms of overall outputs. I'm thinking of Jaguar Land Rover has a 2-litre turbo engine that makes over 200 kilowatts. Jeep has one that's about 200 kilowatts. So this is arguably a little bit understressed in that regard, but performance I think is okay. Now, one thing I will note here, a good thing for four-wheel drives, is that the location of the alternator is relatively high there, so it's not stuck down low amongst the mud. You might have a few less issues there. This is the air intake, which is a bit of an interesting position here. It's not fully forward facing, which does help with getting through mud. It kind of points off to the side here. So, I mean, if water is coming up over the bonnet, you still might have issues, absolutely, but that's not too bad of a design, I think. And also there is some space over there on the other side of the engine to me here. I don't think there is enough to put something like a second battery in there, unfortunately. Maybe you have to move some things around, but it's worth noting there are some riv nut spots there as well. So maybe GWM did plan to put something in there, or they know that something might be going in there at a later date. I'm not so sure, but anyway, it's worth noting. Now, one thing worth noting, we aren't off-road at the moment in this Tank 300, but this is your front tie-down point. I don't think I would be calling this a recovery point. There is only one on the front here, but I have noticed that on the other side of the car, there is actually provision to have another one of these mirror fit on the other side, which would be really handy to have. You could effectively spread the load between 2 points instead of just depending on one when you get stuck. So I don't know if GWM actually offer one of these, but in any case, I think you would have to get one fabricated, but there is a spot to bolt it onto the chassis on the other side. Spending a lot of time behind the wheel of this Tank 300 over the last 3 months has been an interesting job because this is a four-wheel drive and we've wanted to use it off-road for a couple of reasons. You want to see how capable it is, how good it is in terms of just being a bit of a weekend adventure mobile, but also for me, one of the main things about this car was seeing how it drives after a couple of months of being driven through mud, bounced over rocks, punching over potholes and all of that sort of thing. Does it start to lose the shine of a decent ride experience? And when we've been finished with the off-roading stuff, we've been using this car around town as a daily driver, heading to the shops, picking up the kids from school, just going to and from work and grinding through the suburbs. And I haven't really sensed any sense of degradation in this vehicle during that time, which is good. I was kind of worried that maybe you'd get some bad noises, vibrations, rattles, that sort of thing. None of that. It's been really good so far. The suspension seems okay. There's no clunking here. And I've got to say, we have had a couple of decent thuds through mud bogs and that sort of thing with this car. We haven't been easy on it during our time with it. But the ride quality is still good. And I just enjoy spending time in this car overall, really. It's definitely not a sharp driver's car or anything like that. The soft suspension yields good absorption. There's also a fair amount of body roll going on and that sort of thing. So you need to drive it to the application, I think, but it balances it all out pretty nicely, I think. It's decent on the highway, it's decent around town. That lane keep assistance feature is quite frustrating, so you do need to dig through the system to turn that off. And unfortunately, every time you get back in the car, it defaults to being back on again. So sometimes you can live with it, but on some certain roads and on some certain lane marking situations, it is unlivable. Now, one constant source of frustration in this car for myself, but also for others who have been driving, and it's funny because I've actually been driving behind this car and I've witnessed the problem happening. So normally, if you're driving along and you need to use your indicators, you do one little push and it will click 3 times and then it will stop, and then you do a bigger push for a bigger hit there, and that stays on until you turn the wheel or turn it off again. But this Tank 300 doesn't have a lot of detent in between those two modes. So as you're driving, you're turning the steering wheel and that sort of thing, you don't know where your indicators actually are. So you turn them on by accident and then you're trying to turn them off and you're indicating back the other way. It's a bit confusing, and it's not just me. I've had it happen to myself, but pretty much everyone in this car has had the same complaint. You do get a little bit used to it maybe, but at the same time, it catches up with you in traffic and that sort of thing. So a slightly stronger spring would really go a longer way in this car. Now, in terms of fuel economy, it is a little bit of a mixed bag. We've seen as good as 12 or 13 litres per 100 on the open road, cruising on the highway, but around town, you can see a number much bigger than that. So currently, we've been doing a lot of heavy stop-start traffic, stopping, chucking U-turns, accelerating, braking, and that's for filming and all sorts of purposes. But the worst case scenario here is actually getting 18 litres per 100. But that, I've got to stress, is worst case scenario. So even if you're doing a bit of highway and a bit around town, you might see as bad as 15 litres per 100 Ks, but I would say an average of around 13 would be what you would expect in this car. However, the car is happy with cheaper fuel. So you don't need to spend up on 95 RON unleaded if you don't want to. This will be happy with 91. But overall, I've remained impressed with this Tank 300 in terms of being a off-road vehicle. It's definitely not a driver's car in terms of having dynamics and steering feel and that sort of thing. This is a car that's comfortable and easy to drive around town, but the off-road capability is the big trade-off you get here. And with that in mind, let's have a closer look at how this car performs over the long term. During our time with the Tank 300, we've had the opportunity to take it off-road multiple times. We've done rock crawling, we've been mud driving, we've been crossing rivers, and we've been camping out of this car as well. And across the board, except for one big caveat, the Tank 300 has been an impressive off-roader. It feels capable and confident where it needs to be, with soft and supple suspension and well-calibrated driver inputs and helpful off-road driving modes. But of course, those locking differentials front and rear are highly valuable off-road. So much so that we found this Tank 300 to feel just as capable or even a little bit more stable and confident than an icon of off-road capability in Australia, and that's the Toyota Land Cruiser 76 Series wagon. More on this later, don't worry. The Tank 300 isn't utterly amazing for ground clearance, and the bash plates of an independent front suspension vehicle often do get a bit of a workout off-road. But importantly for me, this tank has proven to take a hit really nicely over the long term. We've run out of clearance on rock steps and have been able to drive through quite happily and not take on any serious damage. Plus, we've also got evidence of a mud bog catching out one of us with a little bit too much momentum at one stage. But importantly, no damage was incurred. This Tank 300 does seem to be quite tough. All right, let's field some questions about this Tank 300 from you, our readers. And this is from YouTube. Grey Moti 8131. Have they fixed the suspension so the rear tyres don't leave the road under heavy braking? Until that's fixed, these death traps should be taken off the road. Well, that's a pretty strong opinion there, Grey. No, they haven't. So we took this car out and we did do that test, and driving along at 100 k's an hour, if you do a full slam on the brakes, you can feel those rear wheels lift up off the ground. And we actually got some cameras on there to show you. It's only momentary, but it's definitely there. And when you're braking in a straight line, it's perhaps less of an issue. It's definitely disconcerting feeling it lift up from the driver's seat there and feeling that little moment there where the back wheels do come off. If you were turning and braking at the same time, not normally a good thing to do at the best of times, that could be an issue. So it's definitely worth noting. It's not good. How bad is it? I don't know. If you brake at 80% of the full capacity, it doesn't happen. And maybe if you put some stuff in the boot as well, it would be a little bit less of an issue. But I don't want to downplay it either, because it's a serious safety issue. And if you do have to hit the brakes really, really hard, you could feel a bit of instability there. So definitely keep it in mind. Why does the car do it? I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a suspension engineer, but my gut says that this has fairly soft suspension overall in terms of the spring rate and in terms of the damping. I had a bit of a look underneath as well, and there's not a whole lot of space between the bump stop and the stop point on the front suspension there. So the front would effectively bottom out, and then it would cause the car to pivot under that heavy braking. But hey, I think the braking performance isn't too bad overall in terms of stopping distances. It just doesn't feel great when you're actually doing it. Next one is from Vladimir Yezhov 3521. Vladimir asked, will you guys review the Tank 500 anytime soon? Yes, we will. That's pretty much this car, but a bit bigger again. That's almost 300 series Land Cruiser size. Really interested to see what that's like. We will be driving that car pretty soon, and a review will go up on Drive on our YouTube channel, so definitely keep your eyes peeled for that one. Next question is from Martin Botha. I'm genuinely interested in whether the GWM is an issue on the standard car. It seems fine for this and that, but an overlanding camping trip, I will load it up quite a bit. Martin, if you are going to take this thing overlanding or four-wheel drive touring, as we like to say in Australia, loading this thing up, it's not a good candidate. So I've got the figures here for you. This car, this is the non-hybrid ultra variant. It's got a curb weight of 2155 kilos, so 2.1 tons, and the GVM is 2552 kilos, 2.5 tons overall. And that leaves a payload of 397 kilograms, so under 400. That's Not a lot at all. It hasn't been an issue for me because I've got younger kids in the back, so they don't weigh as much. But if you've got adults and gear, you will easily be overloaded. And that's before you even consider things like towing or accessories or something like that. So I think this works for 2 people, but not anymore. Dire Wolf asked, what's with the rust? You do have steel bash plates up the front. They do get a little bit of a workout if you're driving too hard or on technical terrain, so you will strip the paint. And yes, there is some surface rust appearing on the bash plate of this car. This is, for me, evidence of the hard life the Tank has had with us over the last few months. And it's worth noting that any steel bash plate like this will rust when you start to strip the paint off with impact. This is only surface rust for now, but if it was my car, I would be treating it with some rust converter and sealant to ensure it doesn't get any worse. I've got another question here from Tony M on the Drive website about the braking performance. He's concerned about it. What's our view on it? And would something like aftermarket suspension fix the problem? I'm not a suspension engineer, so I'm not going to jump in here and say what the definite fix is. If you fitted stiffer front suspension to this car, yes, maybe it won't dip down so much on the front, but you're going to affect a lot of other things as well, including ride quality. So I would be hesitant of doing that. And I mean, to put it in a nutshell, if you're concerned about the braking performance of this car, don't buy it. As simple as that. All-Terrain Images on Instagram asked me a question about the back here. G'day, Harry. Hope you're going well. Have you still got that Pajero? How is the width of the rear cargo area? That back door does look narrow. All right, so I have measured this up here. It's approximately 100 centimeters wide, and it's about 85 centimeters tall as well. So naturally, the boot, when you close it, you don't realize that a lot of this space is actually taken up by the interior here. So it's not a huge opening. I think it's okay for the purposes. You do have a little bit of a lip to work around here. I don't see this necessarily being that much of an issue. I think some people might run into trouble just leaving enough space to actually open this back door rather than dealing with the width. Some people thought that, this is in one of the comments somewhere, that because I didn't call out the cup holders being rubbish, that I actually haven't driven the car at all. So A, I have driven the car, and B, I don't think the cup holders are that bad. I think currently got a can of lemonade and a coffee cup in there. I think because they're buried down in this center console a little bit, people find them a bit frustrating to reach in to get. I mean, on the flip side, you're definitely not going to spill whatever is in here because it's fairly ensconced in there. You can also, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but you can pop on a little clip here. You can pull that whole thing out. But I guess, I don't know, it's a fair criticism to have, I suppose, if you don't like it personally. Maybe go to Bunnings and get some polypipe and stick it in there. That'll extend it out or something like that. You can also get a cup holder I've seen on the other side over here. There's a little pop-out shelf drawer, I suppose you could call it. It's handy, but it's kind of useless in terms of its size. I've never actually used it personally, but I have seen someone, I think they 3D printed like a cup holder that goes in there. That could be cool for people who own this car. So this question and answers format is a little bit different for us at Drive in terms of doing long-term reviews. If you do like it, let us know in the comments, because this is something new for us. We want to know if it works, and if you don't think it works, well, let us know that as well. And if you've got any more questions, fire them through, because we still have this car for a little bit more time and we should still be able to answer most things. All right, it's me back again, Sam from the past. This is back from when we filmed part 1 of this Tank 300 long-term video. And I've got some questions to ask part 2 Sam over there from the future. Hello, 4 questions actually. So number 1, what is the thing that you dislike most about the Tank 300? For me at the moment, I think it's the lane keep assist system, but is that still true in the future? Yes, well, lane keep assist is super annoying, but you can turn it off. There's a few buttons you have to press in the infotainment display, which is annoying, but over the long term, I've got to say it's more the payload for me being the major issue with this car, and one of the reasons why I would probably hesitate from buying it personally, because I would love to take this thing loaded up with family and friends, going camping, and the payload is just too restrictive to do that. Do you think that's interesting? Interesting. All right, question number 2. What about the thing you like most about the Tank 300? For me, at the moment, it is definitely the diff locks. We're off-road at the moment. Twin locked four-wheel drive is always fantastic. Yes, diff locks for the win, absolutely. But it's worth pointing out that this Tank 300, it's not just a one-trick pony that has diff locks. It does feel quite stable and confident off-road, even when you don't have those used. And you do have some off-road driving modes, which are good, Diff locks make it even better, but this does feel inherently capable as a four-wheel drive. All right, one more question, and this is a tough one. And this is, I think, where the Tank 300 will either stand up or fall down. Is this as capable as a Wrangler Rubicon off-road? And does it work as a functional family car? Ooh, that's an interesting one. And I've always wanted to put this tank up against the Wrangler because they look the same, but do they perform the same off-road? I have unfortunately not been able to do it this time around, but I do want to do it in the future. However, I do have a really cool comparison here, and that's the 76 series Land Cruiser with the 2.8 litre turbo diesel engine. We put these cars up the same track in the same conditions, and it was really interesting. Now watch these highlights and let me know in the comments below, which one do you think performed better? Time for a head-to-head comparison to see how this Tank 300 stacks up. And as you can see in this video, it performs in a very similar manner overall to a Toyota Land Cruiser 76 series wagon. Surprise, surprise. Both vehicles do start to lose traction and scrabble around on this tough hill climb at one stage, but they're both twin locked, so engaging the rear and the front diff locks helps to fix that problem. But what is more difficult to see in this video is the lower and wider nature of the Tank 300, as well as the softer suspension tune, giving you a much better and more confident feel from behind the wheel. But of course, it's worth noting that the paltry 400 kilo payload of this Tank 300, which is really, really low, pales in comparison to the 1200 kilos available in the Land Cruiser. That's a bit more heavy duty, and we're not even counting the 3.5 ton braked towing capacity yet either. And if you want to see more Tank 300 vs 76 series Land Cruiser in action, head over to our YouTube channel and check out the video of our 76 series off-road review. And the second half of that question is an interesting one, old Sam from the past. Does this work as a family car? I can definitely attest to this because I've had this thing chock-a-block full of humans and gear, and on the Christmas holidays we spent a lot of time behind the wheel of this car as a family rig. And I think if you're going to choose between a Wrangler and this as a family car, I would choose this thing hands down. Yes, it has some issues with the braking system. Yes, it does have some weird electronic lane keep assistance bugs that aren't particularly good on day-to-day usage, but in terms of comfort, practicality, spaciousness, and of course value, this is leagues ahead of the Wrangler. And I think that sums up the sweet spot of this tank overall. It's definitely not perfect, but for GWM, this is a quantum leap forward as a complete offering, I think, for the Australian market. Now, keep in mind a couple of the major issues with this car. One of them is the braking. I'll leave you to decide what you think about that, but also the payload. That could legally preclude you from using this in the way that you wanted to. I'm thinking a family of 5 with 3 big kids in the back and a load of stuff, maybe some off-road accessories. You will more than likely be overloaded in this car and it just doesn't suit the application. But if you're a couple, you're looking at a Jimny maybe, or you're looking at a Wrangler that's too expensive, the Jimny's too small, this thing might step into that void really nicely and be a fun, comfortable and capable, and also a little bit interesting as a daily driver. All right, if you've enjoyed this content, please consider giving us a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to our channel on YouTube. And of course, for the full story on this car, or in fact, any car on the Australian market, any news, reviews, comparisons that you need to know, head over to Drive.com.au.